Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Break the Cycle with me, your host, Joshua Smith. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Thursday evening. God, we're pushing 60 episodes here in the last 4 months. It is a grind, guys. It is an absolute grind, but I appreciate you guys sticking it out with me and supporting the show and becoming patrons and all the great stuff you guys have done for myself and my family and the show. But let's start off with some sponsors. Of course, we have Lorenzotti.coffee for all your delicious Italian coffee needs delivered directly to your door. Bring the taste of Italy home. Use BTC at checkout for a 10% discount. And my friend, my partner on the show, one of the coolest guys I've ever met. Finally had the opportunity to sit down with him and do a show recently. TopLobster.com for the dopest graphics you will ever find because he hand draws everything, including this Scott Horton in the War shirt, sweatshirt that I'm wearing today. It's good stuff. Use BTC at checkout for a 10% discount or join the Patreon, subscribe star, or become a member of this channel to get into the Discord where he drops all of his new art early, like 2 weeks, and gives you like a 30% discount. I think it's 30%. It's really deep. It's way better than the sponsor code. And of course, executive producer of the show, AnthemPlanning.com for all your emergency and crisis planning needs. Check them out. See what they can do today for your business, home, or family life. These people are doing a wonderful job that the government sucks at for a much cheaper price and much more efficiently. Use them and see what they can do for you today. Guys, we have an awesome guest for you today. I'm super, super excited for this one. Probably the biggest guest I've had on the show. No offense to Dave Smith. He's been wonderful. She is a reformed? Is that the word? Yeah, exactly. Investment banker. She's a New York Times best-selling author, including her new book that I have here, The War on Small Business, that basically outlines what we all went through over the last year. And she is an advocate for big hair. She is. Carol Roth, how you doing tonight, ma'am?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you for the lovely introduction and the introduction of my platform of small government, small business, and big hair.
I love it. That was one of the coolest things is the big hair thing to me. I don't know. I'm an 80s kid, It's like big hair just kind of comes with the territory. But I'm a fan. And
the hashtag actually came from one of my followers, Cobra Commander 15, and it is hashtag lazy hair.
I did see someone drop that, and I giggled. I thought that was really.
Every Friday we do lazy hair.
I do really like that. I think that's great. But you got a new book out, and I like it. It is a great book, but I want to hear your journey first. I want to know how you got to where you are. How did you become an investment banker? How did you get into these free market, decentralized principles, and then become this wonderful author that so many people have come to love?
Lord, oh Lord. Okay, so the way back story is I was always sort of that entrepreneurial kid that was hustling through the neighborhood. Whether it was babysitting or selling cookies or T-shirts or whatever it is, I've always been working and entrepreneurial and also interested in markets. And neither of my parents went to college. My dad was an electrician. My mom was sort of a stay-at-home mom turned hobby entrepreneur, if you will. And I got myself into Wharton undergrad, which is the top undergrad business program in the country. And I went to my dad and said, okay, this is great. And he's like, I have no money to send you to school. So good luck to you. And we sat down and kind of figured it out because obviously Ivy League, very expensive. And my dad was very much principled about you can't take on debt unless you can pay it right off. Like that, there was just a sort of non-negotiable. So I said, well, I heard that you can make a lot of money if you go there. And he's like, okay, well, you can only do this if you're going to do that. So I went in with that as my mindset. And when you're in like a position like that, there's usually two paths to paying down debt really quickly. For people who like to do a deep dive into something, they become management consultants. And for people who have ADD and like to do a million different things and work on a million different deals, they become investment bankers. So that's how I ended up in investment banking with my $40,000 of college debt back in 1995. And paid that down in a year and a half, found that I was pretty adept, became a VP and an officer by the time I was 25 years old. And, had this great career, but like I never wanted to be the world's best investment banker and always had all of these other interests. So eventually left that firm, started my own investment bank, and over time said, like, I have to figure out what I want to do. And a lot of people were like, oh, well, you should be on television. And I'm like, well, that's a great idea. I've always wanted to be a game show host. Like, how do I go about doing this? And so I kind of like worked backwards. And this was like way before social media or anything. They were like, blogs and, whatnot. So got a camera, started filming entrepreneurship segments. Use that to get on radio, use that to get on local television, use that to get on national television. And, again, I wanted to talk about like small business and entrepreneurship. But what happened, fatefully, good or bad, is in 2012, when Mitt Romney was running against President Barack Obama, they basically said, well, he's a private equity guy, and it would be helpful if we had somebody who knew like what that was and how to explain it. And you were an investment banker, and can you come on and like explain these things, auto bailouts? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. And I got dragged into politics from somebody who was not political at all. And so all of this sort of knowledge base took like my prior studies and my prior knowledge of markets. And then I started learning the political landscape, was completely horrified by the whole thing. And here we are, still have not yet been a game show host, but I have been a judge for Mark Burnett on America's Greatest Makers on CBS. So reality competition judge, almost there, still working on the game show thing.
Very, very, very close. So let's talk a little bit about the war on small business. The full title is How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. Now, you had to have been writing this in real time.
I was approached by HarperCollins to do an economic breakdown of what they knew was going to be a historic economic moment, not just for our country, but for the world. And we had no idea the scope of what was going to happen. So I was literally following this real time, gathering information, writing, rewriting. I wrote like 3.5 different books during this period of time because things kept shifting and the focus kept shifting. But small business was always in focus because I've been a long time small business advocate. I've written another book, as you mentioned, about small businesses. And in March, when these mandates came down, like I was one of the first people as they were crafting these different acts, like I put out an op-ed and said, this is how you should structure this if you don't want to completely crush small business. So we knew that was going to be part of the overall situation. Little did we know the full scope of what was going to happen. And so all of that sort of unfolded real time. And like the worst part about it is obviously things just keep changing. There's a long tail. So at some point you just had to like cut it off and go, okay, I'm just going to stop here and stop telling the story here. But there's, so much that's happened even in recent months that would be great to add as an addendum.
Sure.
So it's pretty wild time, but that's kind of how it came to be and was an Herculean task because the book is incredibly sourced. Like everything in that book has a freaking source.
Yeah, there's like 30 pages of notes in here.
Yeah, literally been checked like 5 times a piece. So yeah, this was a hard book to write, but I'm really proud because this is the story that is so important that nobody's talking about.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's always about the infection rate and the deaths and this and that, but we don't talk about all the stuff that has come along with the government shutting people down. But this book is more important than just about small businesses, right? Like it's at first glance, you're going to say that's a book about small business, but it really goes so much deeper than that. It's a book about centralization and the distribution of power in this country and the blatant power grabs, and it goes so much deeper. Obviously you wanted to write about small business. You're a small business advocate. You've written about small business before, but what was it that really wanted you to highlight this bigger picture, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was very simply looking at, what it was that had happened, which was clearly the government picking winners and losers, not based on data or science, but based on political clout and connections. And then using that to enable the most historic wealth transfer from Main Street to Wall Street that we've ever seen in history. So, once we had looked at what happened, I thought it was important to go back and say, well, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to the point that enabled something like this to happen? Because that can't just happen overnight. There needs to be sort of a pathway to get there. And then what's the solution to that? So that was kind of my framework, even though the book isn't like, Sesame Street divided up by saying like, here's that. That's the roadmap and sort of how I constructed it. And so I thought it was important. And that's why it includes everything from a breakdown of the Federal Reserve in very simple terms for the average person to understand what that is and the path that they've really created since especially the Great Recession. As well as everything up through China and sort of our relationship with China and how central planning brought that about and how that really has a mirror reflection on the spectrum of capitalism or free markets, free choice on one end, and sort of central planning, force and coercion and control on the other end. And so those things aren't necessarily obvious when you read the book title or even the book jacket, but it comes back over and over again that those are everybody's favorite chapters because it really kind of digs in and gets at these issues where you're able to kind of piece the whole puzzle together.
Sure. And I think one of my favorite things in the book was just one simple term or a couple sentences where you said from too big to fail to too big to succeed. Right? How can you break that down a little bit and let people understand what you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's sort of two components of that. So there's the too big to fail piece of it, which, as we know, is the moniker of the last Great Recession, when the banks were deemed too important, even though they took on these nefarious actions of their own accord that damaged the worldwide economy, and we've all paid for. We still use our tax dollars to sort of bail them out. And this time around, the small businesses didn't do anything. This was government mandate. This was eminent domain, subjugation of property rights for the public good kind of stuff. And they were really too small to matter or too hard to control, perhaps a little bit of both. I lay out the choose your own adventure and you can make that decision yourself. So that's kind of one piece of that. And then you have the government side of it, which is that too big to succeed side. And I don't think people have really taken a look at the structure of the government to see how it's become this Frankenstein monster. Whether you look at the amount that they spend, which before COVID was about 8.1 trillion across all levels of government, whether you look at the more than 1 million laws that were passed over a 50-year period at the state level and the 12 to 15,000 laws and 20,000 regulations in that same or similar period that were passed at the federal level, whether it's the purview of the things that they are involved with, and then just the general idiocy of the people who are in charge of this. I mean, it's not like we're like finding the best and the brightest and the biggest experts to run this. So I just don't think people really understand what this kind of big monster is and how this problem is systemic. There's so many people who want to blame, this guy or this guy or this party. And like changing one or two cogs in this wheel isn't going to fix this. This is a monster. It needs to be fully attacked and, frankly, dismantled because the problem is systemic. And we saw, and I tried to be fair in the book, and it's one of the good pieces of feedback I've gotten, and one of the things that I think has kept me up on some of the major media is that I put blame where blame is due, and that falls on people in both parties. And sometimes the same person gets some blame and some credit because in the nuanced reality, that's just how it is. But it's, it really is systemic, and we're at a point. Too Big to Succeed was actually the second book and book title. It started as The Looting of America, and then it moved to Too Big to Succeed, and then it moved to The War on Small Business. And all of those concepts really are, encompassed in this broader war, which, as we said, is really decentralization versus centralized power.
Sure. And I think your book really highlights a lot of stuff. But during this entire fiasco over the last year, I think the craziest trick that the government has pulled is they somehow got the left, okay, who has been vehemently against monopolies and big corporations and all this stuff. They somehow got the left to cheer on the death of small business in this country and applaud these rising profits for these corporations that they hate. How do you think they pulled that off?
I mean, it's really the media running cover for the broader story, which is, what they're going to gaslight. They've been gaslighting us, trying to tell us this. This is how they're trying to rewrite history, that economically there were no consequences, because they can point to the fact that the stock market did great and that IPOs were at record levels and that SPACs had record values, and they will sweep under the rug the hundreds of thousands of small businesses that were murdered by the middle of last year, the millions more that are struggling to survive, because, again, they consolidated power. I mean, I think people really need to understand, if you look at the economy in the U.S., it's divided like almost in half before COVID. Half of it is decentralized into 30.2 million small businesses that are 99.9% of all small business entities, about half the GDP and about half the employment. The other half, 30.2 million on this side, about 10 to 15,000 big businesses on the other side. So what they're doing is they're taking the decentralization and they're moving it over here, and they're consolidating that wealth and power. So we saw 7 tech companies gain $3.4 trillion in value. Part of that was because they closed down the small business competitors, and dollars went from small businesses to Amazon and Walmart and Target that were open, and that increased their revenues. But there was also multiple expansion because of the Federal Reserve intervention in the market that increased the multiples and the value and disrupted risk in the market. So it's being done on 2 levels. But if you look back and you do a snapshot, you can finagle the argument for people who don't know the data underneath it, that, everything's great, but it's not great for everyone, and it's not great by government mandate, which is really the problem. If this was just free market competition and they outcompeted in an even and level playing field, then fine, that's great. That's what they should do. But when they are getting not just favors, but literally mandates that you are essential and you are non-essential. Like, if it wasn't bad enough that you heard that you didn't build that, now you've been told you're not even essential anymore. That's sort of the outcome. And so that's why people really need to read and understand the book, so that they can counteract those arguments, and that we don't give the media and the government an opportunity to rewrite history and keep shifting the economy into this little pocket that moves us away from free market capitalism towards central planning, under whatever name you want to call it: socialism, democratic socialism, crappyism, whatever you want to call
Tyranny.
it. It's still, right, yeah, whatever it is, it's a handful of people making choices for everybody else. If you're in the club, you benefit, and they use force, coercion, and control. Bad outcome for economic freedom.
Sure, absolutely. I think it's a crazy number that you just threw out there that I don't think a lot of people understand. This small, just how much of the market small business makes up, and in the book you talk about how small business represents decentralization, 100%. And these big businesses represent centralized government, just a couple of people who get to make the market decisions, basically. I mean, do you think that this is just like a big ruse for everybody in the government? This has always been their plan. You had mentioned something in the book about this kind of starting in the 80s and not really just happening fast. I mean, this has really been something they've been pushing for a long time?
I think it's probably, well, listen, I have a quote in the book going back to FDR. He had this small business conference that he was trying to get people buy-in, and he was super frustrated because everybody was independent. He couldn't get them to agree on anything. So, obviously this has been going on since the beginning of time. But I think it probably has gotten a little bit more nefarious as we have gotten these bigger companies with more power. And I can't tell you who is driving it. It may be that the politicians are just dumb pawns, and like they just don't care about the small business. And so the big businesses see that as the opportunity. Like I'm not going to sit and break down, but whether you think it's incompetence, whether you think they think that small businesses are irrelevant, whether you think it's intentional, it really doesn't matter from my perspective, because the outcome matters, and the outcome's all we care about. We never care about intentions. We care about outcomes, because those are the things at the end of the day that drive what's going to happen, and human nature is human nature. But we did see this like all the way back, and why I included the China chapter with the decision to try to include a communist country in capitalist trade. It's like having a football team where like the two teams are playing by two entirely different sets of rules and expecting that it's going to be a good outcome for like everybody in the league. And that's just not the case. So it is interesting to kind of watch the trajectory. And we know the small businesses have been penalized. Again, too small to matter, too hard to control. Doesn't matter, but they have consistently been penalized because they don't have that political expediency. They're not giving the lobbying dollars. They're not making the campaign contributions, and they're just hard to corral. And that is inconvenient if you're a politician and you care about power. And if you are anybody who lives in reality, which I imagine if you're watching the show, you know that there are no politicians out there who like have put human nature aside and are like doing things because they love you, right? Like at the end of the day, they're going to do things that benefit themselves and benefit those around them. And certainly there are a handful of people who are pretty decent in Congress, but they're few and far between.
Thomas Massey's all right.
System is, you can't build a system based on like, unicorns and rainbows.
Sure. There are a few in there, definitely. But I think, and you talked a lot about the economic recovery plans that they put forth in the book as well, and CARES Act and this and that. But it was stuffed with, more money went to the cronies than went to help any person in this country. And we were talking about how, this fiat money that they were sending out, it came to me at the right time because I got all these kids I got to take care of over a year. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. I need that. And if I send it back, they're just going to burn it anyways. So, but how do these people let a nation of millions, hundreds of millions of people kind of just turn off to the fact that the majority of this economic recovery plan, these economic recovery plans and bills were filled with pork, that all this money went to all these things that were deemed essential over us. I don't know.
The media is entirely complicit in this messaging, and they have been from the beginning. The number of people who, when I bring up this war on small business, that will say, well, what's the alternative to lockdowns? And I said, well, we didn't have lockdowns.
Right.
We had targeted lockdowns of some of the people without appropriate compensation. Like they're under the impression that everybody locked down. Amazon's warehouse didn't lock down. Walmart didn't lock down. I can tell you in a lot of states, the weed dispensaries didn't lock down, even though they were illegal.
And the liquor stores.
Prior, right? So it's like, it wasn't, the media has pushed the narrative that we were all locked down, and that's what saved us. So people aren't understanding that from the beginning. So they're not even going to look at the CARES package. And then the CARES, like no media went through and broke this down and raised the red flags. In fact, I am the one who brought up the Harvard thing, which I try not to talk about too much because I'm trying not to catch flack from people. But it was one of my followers who kind of got a table that was buried in like some DOE website of this breakdown. And I went, Harvard, which I always make fun of. I say it's a hedge fund with a learning institution attached to it for cover. They had gotten allocated millions of dollars. And I started going, this is insanity. My small business is going to have to apply for a loan, jump through a hoop, hope to get approved, hope to get forgiveness, blah, blah, blah. And you're giving Harvard, that gets tax breaks, who's been paid in full, that has a $40+ billion endowment, money under the CARES Act? Like, what is happening? And then, I had made such a big deal about it that much bigger people picked it up. And eventually it got to the point where it got to the president, who mentioned it in a press conference, and the journalists still messed up the reporting because they didn't understand the difference between CARES and PPP, and that PPP was a component of the CARES Act. And so they were conflating the two. And I'm like, you guys are so lousy at your job that you're now even like messing this up, and we did the work for you. So it's the media trying to craft this narrative because they're now activists instead of journalists. And apparently not one of them has any sort of financial or economic background to figure this stuff out. And so, we don't hear about these things. We may have heard about a couple things, but people really didn't get a sense of what was going on. And that's where people are like, oh, well, small businesses got PPP. Okay, in the CARES Act, which was trillions of dollars for cronies that had to do nothing, there was a couple $100 billion that was given to small business. It was like less than 20%-ish, I think.
Well, wasn't it like a pool, and like a lot of businesses couldn't even get it? And it
well, that's the thing. So it was multiple tranches. The first tranche was so small that it was exhausted in 13 to 14 days. And because it was structured by, again, either nefarious intentions or imbecility, either way that you want to think about it, it went to the biggest small businesses because it said, okay, we're going to put these like multi-million-dollar ceilings, which again, if you're a business that can take down like millions of dollars in a loan, you probably have other access to capital and don't need to get a survival loan here. But it went to celebrities, and it went to giant businesses, and it went to public companies that they put in there, some of them which were foreign owned. I mean, it was insane. And like your local gym, pizza parlor, hair dryer, hair salon, whatever it is, like didn't even get a chance to get in there because of course the businesses or the banks are going to take care of their biggest clients first. Any business would. So it's the fault of the people who are designing this program to funnel the cash to the people who don't really need it. And so they did fix some of those things, but they never got to the point. I mean, we've spent like more than $6 trillion in terms of relief funds. And, a fraction of that, less than $1 trillion, has gone to support small business. And if they would have stepped up day one with $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion for the affected small businesses, not just all small businesses, but those that were truly affected and didn't have other access to capital, they could have kept everybody on the payrolls. They could have kept those small businesses in business. They could have kept people paying taxes with the mindset that they were going back to the business. And they could have spent 2 to 3 months deciding risk mitigation strategies and let people who were vulnerable go back to their lives. And they did not do that. And I will just say, Joshua, if you were trying to put small businesses out of business, like, is there something that you would have done differently?
No.
Please tell me.
No, I think it's, it's looked to me since pretty much the beginning that was the entire goal of this. It never felt to me like it was for protecting people's health. There's so much focus put on the the economic portion of what's gone on over the last year by the government, and to have all that focus on it, and this is the outcome that they've given us, really feels like it was done on purpose. It really feels that way.
I mean, this is what strikes me today in terms of rhetoric, is that during the grandma killer phase,
oh boy,
if just one person dies, it's not worth it. We have to preserve every life, which again, it was 15 days to slow the spread. That was never the stated goal. But we can't lose one life. We've got to shut everyone down. Now during the vaccine phase of this, to the people who have side effects and perhaps, a small number of people who may end up passing away, very small, but still someone, well, it's worth it because it's a vaccine. So we went from like one life isn't okay to one life is totally worth it, depending on which phase we were in and what sort of political outcome was being pushed. And that's really, really frightening. And again, it's like, I don't care. I'm not even trying to convince people of lockdowns or liberty. Like, you can make that decision, but you can't have this government picking winners and losers and not compensating people for taking their property rights away. That's like just an insane no man's land. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we did.
Sure. Would you agree with the phrase that the corporate news media is the enemy of the people?
I would.
Good. That's what I like to hear.
And I mean, I've been, to be honest, I've been in and around media for 12 years. There are some good people. And I would say, particularly those who cover politics and the economy. I would say there's plenty of great investigative journalists who have broken news on all kinds of things, or that cover other things that like shouldn't be included. But in terms of telling us really what is going on, holding politicians accountable, giving accurate feedback for economics that aren't based on, oh, I like this guy or I don't like this guy. I mean, they are evil. They're evil.
Shout out to Greenwald. So what do you I haven't seen the actual numbers, but I was wondering if you knew the actual impact of this on small businesses as far as percentage wise. What percentage of small businesses will never open again?
So that's a very difficult thing to answer because, again, nobody knows what they're talking about. So let me give you a couple of data points. As of June of last year, the Hamilton Project, which is affiliated with our friends at Harvard that we talked about, so like not exactly like a right-leaning organization or one that's trying to paint a rosy picture, had said in June of 2020, there were 400,000 small businesses that had closed permanently. The Biden administration acknowledges that there are more than 400,000 small businesses that have closed permanently. So we know that no matter what, that's like best case scenario, which is definitely more than that, that's what happens. And again, to put that in perspective, there's only 10 to 15,000 big businesses. So it's like 40 times the amount of big businesses in existence on the small side that have closed, okay? Then there are millions more that we know were struggling to survive within that period. There is another related project called Opportunity Insights. They have statistics that are showing around like 35 to 38% of all small businesses have closed permanently. I'm telling you, those numbers are too high. That must be something like employer-owned businesses or consumer-facing businesses. There's no way that 10 million of them were killed. But based on the data point that we had of the 400,000 and the employer businesses, to say maybe 2 million, I think that's probably fair. And there's a lot more that are in economic despair that I think it's going to take a couple years for them to shake out. What you're not going to end up seeing, though, is the real focus of the numbers, because people got so much stimulus and were put out of work. There were a bunch of new startups, like record numbers of new businesses. So we're going to have millions of new businesses that come in to replace the couple million that we probably lost. And net, it might actually look like an increase, or it might look, about even. And they're going to try to tell you, oh, see, it was just a natural fallout. And that's not the case. And in fact, the ones that have started, we know that, again, 2/3 of those don't have employees. So they're just people kind of doing their side hustles and whatnot. So it's not okay to kill a business that has been around for 100 years in Chicago, that went through prohibition as a bar and couldn't make it through COVID. And then just because somebody got some stimulus money and decided to start up a little hobby business, go, okay, well, like, it's all even. So that's where you're going to see the media gloss over all of this, and why it's so important for people to understand the reality, because they are trying to rewrite history.
Oh, undoubtedly, and they always are, right? It's the victors always write history, and at the end of this, unfortunately, hundreds of millions of people are going to be the losers, and we won't get the opportunity to write history. But there's great people like you and Tom Woods, who's been really good on all this stuff through not just the business side, but the actual medical side of this stuff as well. So hopefully people keep speaking their truths like that. Let's step away from the economic talk for 1 second. I want to talk about your influences. You talked a little bit about Uncle Mitty prior to us starting the show. Who else have you read that you really kind of brought you around to these ideals?
Yeah, I mean, I love Uncle Milty. I love Thomas Sowell. I love Hayek. I love Rothbard. I mean, there's a whole bunch of really amazing dudes out there that are all fantastic and obviously have done all of the work. I mean, all this economic stuff, like none of this is new.
Right.
It's all from years and years and years. I mean, you go back to Adam Smith, you go back to Locke. I mean, there's just so much history to take in. But what I will say about me, and even though I went through and studied economics, I don't have the retention for any of this. I remember nothing that I learned in school because the way that information is presented is very theoretical and academic and not real world. So I feel like I have a combination of taking that and then taking real world and mushing it up into sort of the people's economics, if you will. I appreciate Thomas Sowell in Basic Economics, having a huge economics book that had no charts and graphs basically in it, and really easy to understand, but it's long, right? It's big and you still kind of have to grind it out. So I'm not a disciple of X. And if you put me on the spot, I could probably give you the general tenets. I just find the academic stuff isn't as relevant as what does it mean in terms of the real world. So I spend more time looking at the real world data and outcomes and trying to piece it together that way.
Sure. You keep hanging out with people like me and Clint from Liberty Lockdown, and soon enough, you're going to be spouting Austrian economic theories. I promise you. I promise you that.
I will have to say, I mean, obviously you saw in the book, I've quoted Sowell a million times, Rothbard's in there a bunch of times. I think Uncle Milty made it in. I mean, he's definitely in prior drafts. I'm not sure if he made it in this draft. So the influences are all there. It's just kind of slightly tweaked to be more along the lines of stuff. I used Cardi B to talk about
Why not?
Capitalism instead of the straight up Austrian dude.
So the next step after Milton Friedman is David Friedman, Machinery of Freedom. That's the next logical step after reading Mitty. But you had a section in here about business licensing reform.
Yeah.
That was kind of shoved into this whole ordeal. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's talking about these sort of anti-competitive barriers that make it harder for people to get on that path of wealth creation. And I'm very focused on that. I mean, as a free marketeer, I believe in the abundance mentality. I believe in the growing of the pie. I believe everybody should have the opportunity, should they choose, to pursue wealth creation opportunities. And we're just seeing those shut down, whether it's the opportunity to own a small business, to invest in the stock market without it being disrupted or risk, to buy a house, whatever it is that you can do to gain equity. We're seeing that disrupted. So the more things that you can take away from the barriers to starting a small business, the more opportunities people are going to have to create wealth. And things like, the most egregious one is obviously hair braiding, right? Something that men and women do for their children every day before going off to school. It costs people, thousands of dollars and, hundreds or thousands of hours of their time and ongoing licensure to be able to braid hair for a living. How is that helping anybody? I mean, you're not even brandishing a scissor. It's a pure power grab. It's a pure money grab. It's a pure barrier to keep people out. And as you can imagine, just based historically on styles, that disproportionately affects African-American communities and people of color. So there have been initiatives. There's a great initiative that I cite in the book that has been taking that on, and they have been going across the country, and we've seen places like Florida repeal these needs. or these licensing needs. And the crazy thing about COVID is it just showed how ridiculous all of these things were, whether it was when hand sanitizer couldn't be found. And so they lifted the barriers on who could produce hand sanitizer. And all of a sudden, like in a week, there's, oh, look, there's hand sanitizer. Or even just, the nursing restrictions when they were running out of certain personnel because they couldn't travel across state lines or whatever, and they removed those. And we figured this out. So they basically proved the case that they are limiting competition through these actions. And there's so many examples outside of licensing, anti-competitive regulation and insurance and so on and so forth that just make it harder for somebody to try to take advantage of that wealth creation opportunity. And to what end? Is it really for a benefit, or again, is it part of the greater war on small business? And I would contend that it's the latter.
Sure, and I wanted to highlight specifically that little section because we talked a little bit about how this has been going on since the 80s, but a lot of people are like, oh, COVID's been an attack on the small business industry, but it's like everything the government has done for years, for decades, has been to attack these small businesses. And that just, the business licensure has always been an insane thing to me.
Let's talk about Dodd-Frank for a second, because the Great Recession was really this giant attack on small business, both in terms of Fed intervention and how that disrupted risk in the market, took down interest rates, got more free capital to the big companies who could access them. But if you look at the regulation that was meant to rein in those big banks, what was the outcome of that? Well, it took the number of small and community banks from about 100 per year on average, starting to 3. It had a lot of small business banks that went out of business. As you can imagine, who are the banks that lend to small businesses? It's the smaller banks because they have less capital to deploy. So that's what they're going to do. So small business lending off a cliff. And then at the same time, these big banks had less competition. So they went out and they increased their big business lending with, again, the help of the Fed that's printing. And that went through the roof. So this legislation that was supposed to help the little guy and to rein in the big bank ended up giving them free rein and ended up being a tilting of the playing field towards big businesses as well. And, that's one of just many examples, but a perfect example of, again, something that's been going on for years that was very clearly not a small business issue, but they found a way to make it a small business issue and still make the big guys wealthier and more powerful.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy how the more you dig into it, the more you understand how aggressive they are towards small businesses. And I have talked about the charity industry quite a bit. When I'm talking, private charities, people are always like, oh, people aren't charitable. They don't want to start charities. And I have to remind people that, lots of people try to start small charities, and because of the bureaucratic red tape that they're wrapped up into, it's some inordinate amount percentage fail within the first year because they can't get through the government barriers to starting a charity. Meanwhile, the government's constantly pushing things like the Red Cross down our throat that have like an 80% overhead, and so it's kind of the same. It's along the same lines. It's like you're only allowed to use these approved businesses, right? These are the people that we've approved, and we can control them through, they need favors, we need favors, but all these small businesses we can't control, and we can't control the market that way. And more people need to read this book and understand that. What do you think is the solution to all this? How do we push back on this stuff as a society?
Well, isn't that the $30 trillion and counting question?
Exactly.
So, there's what's the easiest thing? The lowest hanging fruit is for you to vote with your dollars. There is a piece of this that is in your control. I saw a statistic yesterday that for back to school shopping, 85% of the digital shopping is expected to go to Amazon.
Of course.
And again, there's nothing wrong with Amazon, outside of the benefits that they get from the government intervention. But like, if you're finding benefits in their innovation, that's fine. But maybe think about spreading out your dollars to a small business as well, if you don't want Amazon to be the only business that's left standing. Just something to think about. I think we need more legal challenges. I think I've been encouraging small business owners to sue their local jurisdictions, for eminent domain. I put some folks in touch with some organizations that represent these kinds of injustices for free. So I think we really need to start pushing back. There's so many things the government does that are just pure infringements on our rights and freedoms, and very little of that goes challenged. So I think we need to spend more dollars, not just worrying about like installing the right candidate in Congress that's in the machine, but like challenging the machine and like starting to tear down some of these things. And then, Lord, if we don't rein in the Federal Reserve, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, that has to be number one. And I'm not necessarily on the abolish the Fed train because, again, strategic thoughts here. And I think probably Milton and Friedman and some others have made this argument before. But if you take the Fed away, you risk the federal government picking up that purview. And like, if there's any outcome that's worse than the Board of Governors making that decision, it's Congress making those decisions. So I think we need to put guardrails around what it is that the Fed can do. Milton Friedman, obviously, back in the day, suggested creating a formula that basically the money supply increases were tied to some factor of an increase in GDP or other kind of growth. Something that basically doesn't allow them to continue to monetize our debt. Something that doesn't allow them to just print ad nauseum and to artificially suppress interest rates. If we don't get on that scenario, it's going to be really bad. And frankly, it may just be too late. As you mentioned, Clint at Liberty Lockdown, we had an offline conversation about the 12 different possible scenarios. Maybe there's even more from this unprecedented central bank intervention, not just here in the US, but also around the world, and what's going to happen. And what's the history of the reserve currency, being subject to this kind of scenario? It's just, there's no data to go back to other than we just generally understand that actions have consequences. And so to think there are going to be no consequences to this kind of action, anybody with any sort of an economic brain knows that can't be the case. But what that looks like, we could sit here and have another hour debate over which one of the outcomes we end up with. But going forward, if we can kind of somehow manage that, I really think the Fed needs to be addressed, which is why I included it in the book, because it is so opaque intentionally, and not enough people. I mean, how many people you think call their congresspersons you really need to get on the Fed? But come on, but they should.
Well, and I didn't address the Fed so much in this conversation because I have an exclusive stream that starts right after we end here, where I figured we could spend 10 to 15 minutes addressing the Fed for all the subscribers of Patreon and Subscribestar and the channel members. I really want to get in there and kind of break down the Fed and the Fed's involvement and what can be done there. So, but we are at the end of this public stream, so I think you're amazing. I want to make that very clear. This book is amazing. It needs to be read by all of you. You need to go right now and find The War on Small Business and order it so that it can be sent to your house and you can read it the next couple of days so that we can all be on the same page when it's time to start pushing back on all of this bullshit. I mean, frankly, absolute bullshit. Most of you are called non-essential when we all know that if your job puts food on the table for your family, it is essential. It is always going to be essential, and the government should have no say in that. Carol, what's next for you?
I'm going to work on becoming a game show host. That's really what I want to do. So, I'm going to go back to the drawing board and try to stop, spending all my time arguing about politics and do fun things. But I mean, honestly, I don't know. But I am going to try and do that. So
we did get one super chat from One's compliment. He says regulations are like raising the water level from 3 feet to 5 feet in a pool with an anchored down midget and a pro basketball player.
Exactly. I feel like that's somewhere in chapter 9.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there, absolutely.
Yeah.
And H. Reedon said, which page in the book should we all be on? All of them. We should be on all the pages. All of them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, here's my feeling. Is like, this isn't my book. This is everybody's book. This is a movement. Like, the war on small business should be a thing that people talk about, like kind of like Too Big to Fail. Like, you should be talking about this as a concept. And I hope people don't even attribute it back to me. It's like, I don't remember where I heard it, but here's this thing. You guys need to take this word and spread it out so that we not only don't have history rewritten, but that we preserve economic freedom and wealth creation opportunities for future generations. I mean, it is that level of importance.
Whoa. I have Stefan Kinsella on next week. I'll be talking about, the copyrights then. But, Carol, you're amazing. Where can all these people find you? How can they support you? How can they support your fight against the war on small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm spend most of my time on Twitter at Carol J.S. Roth. If you're not already following me and have a warped sense of humor, which it seems like you guys do based on the comments, that's where you find me. The War on Small Business. I encourage you to look to your local bookstore, independent bookstores, bookshop.org. Again, if you want to buy it on Amazon, like I'm a capitalist, that's fine, but you're voting with your dollars, so perhaps consider that. And if you own a production company and you want to hire me as a game show host, reach out through my website at contactform@carolroth.com.
Yes. Hire Carol as a game show host so she can drop little truth bombs on America through culture. I love it. You
want to buy an E? And how about that, you socialist?
Yeah, exactly. Someone said I just read whatever's on the teleprompter. I want everyone to know that I do not have a teleprompter, and that is why I stutter so much. It'd probably be a much better show if I had a teleprompter, but I do not have one. The first couple episodes I did script pretty bad, and it was a little rough, so I stopped doing that. But I was talking about like Waco and Ross Ulbricht, and I wanted to get all the case stuff right, and so. But I don't do that anymore. Carol, I appreciate you. This wonderful book. I hope everyone will buy it and read it, and we can fight this war together. There it is. I got my copy right here. Oh, there we go. Right there. It was behind you there for a second. I always forget it's here on the screen. There you go. War on Small Business. Order it today. Carol, I will see you in just about 3 minutes for the exclusive stream where we will do nothing but shit on the Fed. I promise. Thank you so much. I dropped my whole controller there. All right, guys, another awesome show. Break Cycle. Thank you so much for hanging out. Make sure you check out our sponsors at laurenzotti.coffee for all your delicious Italian coffee needs. Delivered directly to your door. Bring the taste of Italy home. Use BTC at checkout for a 10% discount. And, of course, toplobster.com where you can get this great Scott Horton in the War shirt that I'm wearing today and 1,000 other awesome graphics on pretty much anything you want them on. Backpacks, hoodies, beanies, socks, I think he's got some yoga pants even. He's doing great things over there. Use BTC at checkout for a 10% discount. Or join the Patreon, the Subscribe Star, or this membership of this channel right here. If you hit the join link under any of the videos, you get into the Discord chat. You can get his stuff 2 weeks early before he releases a general population at like a 30% discount. So you're getting t-shirts at like $12 or something. It's a really good deal. And, of course, Executive Producers Show, anthemplanning.com for all your emergency and crisis planning needs. Check them out today. See what they can do for your business, home, or personal life. They're doing a great job that the government sucks at for a much cheaper price and much more efficiently. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Wonderful, wonderful libertarian-owned business from Delaware. Guys, tomorrow on the show, I have my mentor and one of my favorite people in the world, Larry Sharp, coming on the show. It's going to be an awesome conversation. If you remember and have been following me for a long time, I traveled the country for 4 years. I went to 40 states. I spoke at all kinds of state and national conventions. Got to keynote a ballroom behind Ron Paul in Omaha, Nebraska, before being endorsed by Ron Paul for chair last year, which is one of the pinnacles of my life. But everywhere I went, Larry Sharp was there, and I wouldn't be half the person I am without him today. In fact, he is the one that suggested I start a podcast. So you guys that hate me have him to thank. I will see you tomorrow for the show with Larry. If you guys want to come into the exclusive streams, join the channel now. Until then, don't forget to break the cycle.
Due to legal reasons, I just have to explain. The lyrics of my last song may seem to contain a violent call to action in the verse and refrain, but I just meant it in Minecraft. The helicopter part was in reference to GTA 5 and the things you do. So any violence you commit, I am not an excuse, because I just meant it in Minecraft. Well, Chipper is my friend and he's constantly cold. Accusations of incitement getting totally old. Make your own choices, yeah, you have control, because I just meant it in Minecraft. Obviously I would never advocate force, unless there's due process and a trial, of course. And if you're convicted, we will make you a corpse in Minecraft, just in Minecraft. Nothing I mean, you know it. No product bidders cause it closed for COVID. Holy shit, I think I'm